I would say before you do that, understand how distribution works. Because once you understand how you make your money back, then you can justify how much money you spend.
Can you talk about the decision that you were not going to make movies by committee anymore? And what does that mean?
For me, it's going back to accountability and being able to hold myself accountable for not growing, for not achieving the level of growth that I need to achieve. When you're making a movie by committee, which I understand completely that most industry movies are made by, when it's, a studio or whatever, but going through that many levels of decision making and, this person believes they know what's better for the film, they know what's better for the audience, they know what's better for marketing, I believe you need one voice. We need one voice that ultimately makes the decision of what to do inside of the film. You can definitely confer with everyone around you. When I hire an actor, I hire them because they are the best at what they do and they fit this role. And when they read the script, they're going to be able to tell me things to a level of detail that maybe I haven't thought about, right? And I trust their intuition. And I'm going to figure out a way where we can kind of make that work inside the film. But that's not what I mean by committee. What I mean by committee is a executive producer who now says, you know what? And this is a real thing that happened. Yeah, I think we need a topless scene right now. And how? In what way? It's like, at what time would somebody take their clothes off? That doesn't even make any sense. There's a murderer running around and everybody's in the same room. Like, what would be the reason that they would need to, and it's like a lot of those decisions that are just made because people want to be heard and they want to see whatever they've said show up on the film. It's a vanity. And ultimately, when you're making movies like that and by committee with multiple people having all of this input, your film is getting further and further and further away from what you're trying to achieve. And as I said, the only person I'm really competing with is the person that I was yesterday. I'm constantly trying to grow. And how can I measure my growth if everything around me is being affected by people who are not me? And people who've already articulated that it has to be in there or, basically they can withdraw funding. That's ultimately what it is that the decisions when they're being made by committee are made by people who can ultimately make the decision of, if you won't do what I'm asking you to do, if you won't put this in the film, I can withdraw funding. And I can do it at any time. I can do it at any point because, again, they're not as invested in the film as you are. They're invested in their own vanity a lot of the times. Not all the times. There are some great financiers out there and some great executive producers, but unfortunately, I haven't worked with them, but the ones that I've worked with have been kind of vain. And it has been the vanity of having whatever was in their head added to the film, even if it doesn't make sense story-wise.
Sure, and in any relationship where someone's giving you money, they kind of own you in a sense.
They do. They do. And especially when you know that they can pull the plug. And it's the reason why I have overlooked a lot of the things that have been done on the set. You have to let a lot of things go and try to control the things you can control. But along the way, this committee will continuously try to influence everything that you do. And it makes your personal growth, you can't measure it because it's not really you. It's you plus that guy and that lady and that kid. It's you plus all of this when it should be you making the sole decision. Now you can take inspiration from what other people say. You can take some advice from what other people say, if it applies, if it's applicable, but you can ultimately decide if it's not. And I only began to get that sense of freedom when I started to finance my own projects. That's when I began to see it.
What kind of sacrifices did you have to make to be able to finance your own work?
Security.
Financial security?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
For a while. For a while. Financial security. A lot of things that probably so many too many to name, but things that would have certainly made my young lady happy. We had to sacrifice a lot. We had to sacrifice a lot of time that you would normally spend together. I was holed up by myself doing so many things myself, because whatever you can't pay for, you have to assume that responsibility yourself. So even when we would be sacrificing financially, we were also sacrificing just the time we got to spend together. And it was a very hard time in the beginning, a very hard time. But here's the thing is, and I don't advise that people just run out and start self-financing their own stuff. I would say before you do that, understand how distribution works. Because once you understand how you make your money back, then you can justify how much money you spend on a project, right? You don't want to you don't want to take, a loan out for $80,000, $100,000 and make a movie that you're only going to make $5,000 from. You need to stack as many stack as much of the deck in your favor as possible. So, but in the beginning, I certainly had to sacrifice financial security, and I had to sacrifice a lot of time and spend a lot of time away from my lady, and I've been away from my family since 2004. I go back home every once in a while to Georgia, but for the most part, my family has seen me on average maybe once every 3 years, maybe every 2 years, but I probably lean towards the 3. I don't go home that often. So there's been a lot of sacrifice to get to where I am today.
And when you're writing a script, is it now in your mind that, okay, this is going to cost too much and I'm not going to make my money back on this, I have to change this scene?
No, I'm always aware of the story that I'm writing and the budget that it falls within. I make sure I tell the truth in the story, and budget should never dictate truth, but budget should dictate what you're trying to do as a whole. I don't think you should make a sci-fi opera if you only have $2,000. I think that's setting yourself up for failure. I think that if you're going to tell a very intimate story between two characters that, they met outside of a motel, in the parking lot, and they're developing this romance over 2 days at the motel, and one guy is there on a business trip and the lady lives there, whatever. But if you're trying to make something very small and mostly just the conversations that they have between one another, and that's easy to do, and that's very inexpensive. But if one of them is a cybernetic organism and they shapeshift and they walk through these wormholes that constantly open up, and now all the machines are coming out to attack everybody and the motel blows up, then I think you've kind of set yourself up for failure.